No, sorry, let him know.
Mike Carley, Johnny, apologies first of all for missing your own contribution. I was in the chamber for justice statements, but I read it in advance of the meeting, and just listening to the conversation and where it has kind of inevitably gone is maybe indicative of where society, both north and south, are at, that we're gravitating towards the issue of unity and reunification because of the very obvious political dynamics that are at play all around us. And Chris said far more eloquently a lot of what I would hope to have said, but there does seem to be, I always find that it kind of, and I don't know if you would agree, I kind of find this recoil from the debate around reunification primarily actually at a political level. I live in and had the privilege to represent probably one of the most contentious or notorious or whatever cliche you want to attach to it interfaces in the north of Ireland. And touch wood, I'm not tempting fate at all, but I don't see any evidence off the back of all the recent polls, off all the back of the statements back and forward, that there's any reversal in the trenches and people are at each other's throats, and all of the work that has been going on, that was sustained through the flag protests, which was some of the most difficult periods we found ourselves in, is sustained. It's still ongoing. Loyalists will attend Feeling Football here in a couple of weeks and have the debates with their Republican counterparts the way that they have done over the last 20 plus years of the peace process. So in my experience at a civic and at a community, and increasingly at a business and economic level, people are starting to think about unity in a way that they never have before. And I actually think it's an abdication of our responsibilities and our commitment to the Good Friday Agreement if we say to people or try and discourage them from doing that. We should be facilitating that kind of national dialogue. We should be emboldening and empowering that. But the point, or the question I wanted to ask you is where you see, within maybe that specific question of reunification, where you see academia, where you see their role. Would you agree that maybe they haven't been as involved, certainly domestically, on preparing, whether it's research or whatever it may be, in comparison to some of their international counterparts who are looking at this, and just what value you put on that? Because I think it's critical, actually. I think it's crucial that we have that world of academia arguing both for and against in order to provide us with the necessary detail and information that we'll need going forward. So, Shimamage, Shangar, Mike.
Thank you. Chris, I think you're entirely right. I think the Conservative Party have no psychological or emotional attachment to the Good Friday Agreement, to be pretty blunt. I don't think that because they were not part of the development of it post-Major and the getting it to the point where we are now, and I think that has an implication there in terms of how they see Northern Ireland in terms of moving forward. I'm very concerned around some of the lack of decisions being made or not being made, for want of a better word, in terms of, I've highlighted the policing board. That to me is one of the biggest critical incidents facing the north for Northern Ireland right now. I'll answer your point. We're running out of a lot of successes of the peace process, and to me policing is one of the headline successes of the peace process. A lot of sacrifices were made by community, by the organisation itself, by elected representatives to get us to a place where it is largely representative and legitimate organisation and is about people associated with keeping people safe. But we haven't had a public meeting since December 2016, which is a disgrace. It really is, in terms of where we are moving, and I don't know what the logic is by not changing legislation to put in place elected representatives' independence, but we need to do something around policing because it's not sustainable. And the conversations around new officers because of Brexit, issues around changing crime, issues around resources, all these issues are just stacking up and we're not dealing with them, and that is directly related to the Secretary of State in terms of trying to address that. So that to me would be the big critical incident that I see. You alleged, or I talked about pay as well, and that's another one, and then there's lots of others around historical inquiries, etc., etc. So that really concerns me. There's far better academics like Katie Hayward and people like that around Brexit, around the issues around rights and where that sits, and they would be better placed to answer back on that. Now, you're entirely right. I think academics at times have been a wee bit behind in terms of the subject area. I think that we've seen it in Brexit, where a lot of the evidence around implications of Brexit just get lost in the narrative. And I think in the world we live in now, in social media and Twitter, where people try to convey their message in 150 characters, that evidence-based decision-making goes out the window. And I think academia has a role to play there in terms of trying to... But the key here is that they don't pitch it at a level that is just so abstract that people don't get. I think that academics have to be able to pitch at multiple levels, whether it's through Twitter, Facebook, social media, blogs, newspaper articles, and then academic articles. But they need to be able to articulate the same message at multiple levels so that everybody has access to that information. Sometimes I think we have a tendency to speak at this level, and we need to be able to articulate because we are in a unique position, especially in Northern Ireland. Universities have that gravitas, I think, in terms of neutrality, but also in being able to provide a non-agenda around some of this stuff.
Very briefly, in terms of a supplementary, Chair, they're invested, and I think that's the key point, because for me, you're right, in terms of how we communicate and research this appropriately. It's obviously important that it isn't confined within the context of a tweet, because we see that certainly at some of the bigger geopolitical levels, just how damaging that can be, and I'm conscious of our audience in the gallery, so I'll not say too much. But nevertheless, having said that too, the thing for me is that it's also this whole notion or adage of fake news. We need to be very careful that we're not. When we say things like a unity poll or reunification would be divisive, do you know what's divisive? Partition. And has proven to be divisive for the best part of 100 years. So I think if we are to have the argument, we certainly need to move beyond. And that's not to dismiss people's concerns. There's people out there who have very real concerns, and they should be taken on board and respected too. But I think we need to move until the point where we are now, certainly from a state and government perspective in the south, and Mark will forever being here telling us about the state's constitutional obligations and political obligations under the Good Friday Agreement, and rightly so. We have suggested things, again, I don't know what your own view would be on this, but we have suggested in the past the establishment of an Oireachtas committee that would look at all of the implications around reunification, whether that's inter-community, whether that's political, whether that's social, economic, and unfortunately, again, there has been some element of recoil from that has hindered that from happening. I actually think that's the central call of why we're here. We're here to advocate platforms and articulate political viewpoints. So I think that would allow and furnish us with the opportunity to engage with all of the sectors, including academia, who, again, I would stress, I think will have a central role as we move forward.
I don't disagree.